This is the Stine Seedcast. I'm your host, David Thompson. Join me as we visit with growers, agronomists, seed experts, and other industry professionals about seed, agronomy, and the business of farming. Hello, welcome to the Stine Seedcast. I'm David Thompson, National Marketing and Sales Director for Stine Seed Company. Today, we welcome back Stine Seed Farm Manager, Steve Luther. Thanks for joining us, Steve.
Well, thanks for having me again.
So in this episode, Steve's going to join us to talk about Stine's seed corn production and how we go about the business of producing seed for Stine. So let's get started. So Steve had you on the Seedcast here just about a year ago, and but just as a refresher, maybe give us a quick bio, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for Stine.
You know, my whole journey here, I was farmed on my own for over a decade and a half. Things didn't work out for me, and financially, so that's how I got to Stine. I think Fred brought me on in November of 2001, and kind of just started out as a farmhand, and that quickly evolved into being his assistant, and now the farm manager. Just over what seems like just a few years. It's been over 2 decades. So that's been my path here, and of course what we do and what I do all day long, and it encompasses more than just one thing on the farm, but seed corn is, of course, a big part of what we do.
Yeah, so again, when we spoke last, I think I said we've only scratched the surface of some of what goes on there. So definitely was excited to have you back on. And as you said, one of the things that you're key in is our seed corn production that we do, for Stine Seed Farm and Stine Seed Company. So that's kind of what I want to discuss today. So a lot of our listeners probably are somewhat familiar with seed corn production, but maybe don't understand all the aspects, or in particular, maybe don't understand how what we do at Stine is maybe a little different than what other people do. But before we dive into a lot of detail, I guess for maybe some listeners who are more the uninitiated, who maybe just don't really know what's going on with seed corn production, can you give me just a brief overview of maybe contrast seed corn production versus what we're all used to seeing, which is commercial grain?
Yeah, so when you grow in commercial grade or grain, it is, of course, very, very straightforward. We do have that part of the farm as well, and I consider that to be pretty straightforward, and that's the farmer in me. But when you dive into the seed corn production, there's a lot that goes into that. And even, this time of the year, it's just merely plotting out where things are going to go versus what the neighbors are going to have, just down to pollen selection. We don't want anybody else's pollen if we can, not have it. So, we start early planning even right now.
And I guess, the fact that when we talk about hybrid seed corn, when we talk about seed corn production, that's where the hybrid part really comes from. That's what makes seed corn production different from just growing corn, right?
Correct. That is right. And, so then when you start to get into your spring and, the fertility side of it, a lot of that is just all the same. We prepare the ground no differently than we do for our commercial corn. But, typically here on the farm, depends how many acres we have. Some years we get started early just because we have a lot of it to get in the ground, and we try to space that out for detasseling reasons, harvest reasons. We can't do everything all in one day. We could probably plant it all in one day, but the rest of the summer and fall would be something to talk about. So, once we kind of get the spring fertility out of the way and we start laying down our herbicides, that, of course, that's a little different. We use different herbicides. In a world of seed corn production, you're dealing with inbreds that may not have traits on both sides of them, so we have to treat everything conventionally. So, we and you don't want weeds.
Yep.
As the summer goes along and you start to detassel this corn, and of course we machine cut, and we can get into all that here in a little bit. When you start doing that and exposing the sunlight to the ground, we have to have a good herbicide program in place to suppress weeds, and that takes a lot more management and a lot more cost involved in that than just what you would typically see in a commercial corn growing atmosphere.
Yeah, so the process of, I guess, growing a seed corn crop involves inbreds, right? You're planting 2 different inbreds and you're getting them to cross-pollinate so that you ultimately get the hybrid seed that you need.
Yeah, that is correct. And when you say it, it just seems normal to me, but most people probably don't realize that involves a female, that involves usually 2 different dates of male. And at times that can mean 2 or 3 different plantings where we're going out there. So you're dealing with, you can go off of your heat growing units, or we go off of leaf stage. Depends if you plant early or late, where your heat units are at. So there's a lot that goes into this, more so than just piling in the planter and heading out.
Well, that's certainly what it sounds like. So let's get into kind of the nitty gritty of what it's all about. So, as you said, I think as we sit here in winter, everybody's eyes are starting to look toward spring. As you said, I'm sure you've already started that process today. But let's talk about maybe pre-planning. What's that winter look like as you're heading toward looking at this seed corn production year?
So for me, and it started, probably even a month ago when we were starting anhydrous. At that time, Harry's going through his data. I'm getting kind of a generic list anyway, or an idea of what we'll be planting, how many acres we'll be planting. So I'll be, starting to select those fields. We try to keep a lot of that as close as we can to the plant. Just for the mere fact of there's so much to haul, or you're transporting people all summer. So we like to keep things close to home base as possible. And then we're looking, if it's something we want to plant earlier, or are we waiting? What do those fields look like with the neighbors' crops, with our crop? What needs to go in early around us? And will they plant early? Will it be soybeans? So we're always trying to figure out, or I am, what is the best scenario here to deal with the summer and pollen that comes off someone else's hybrid corn. We don't want that going into what we're making.
Right.
So there is some thought this time of the year of that, and trying to structure where things are going to go. And you build the best plan at this point you can. It's pretty generic, because by the time planting comes, all that's out the window, and we end up shooting from the hip a little bit. But that's kind of what it looks like right now.
Yeah, so in terms of the planning, part of that is just figuring out what you have for, what the acres are that you need, what fields are in play. As you said, proximity is of value. And then trying to understand, what else you guys have going in that area, in addition to what your neighbors have, what they're doing. And you mentioned something there earlier. You talk about even staggered planting. I know that's something so you actually kind of coordinate that a little bit to some extent with other farmers in the area.
I do. Yeah, I communicate. I just kind of ask, I know a lot of the neighbors, and they're all, for the most part, everyone around us is so good to deal with, and we've got really great neighbors. But I reach out to them, hey, are you guys corn on corn, or is it soybeans? And typically I can tell, because they've either put ammonia on, or
sure.
It's kind of, some of that explains, or is self-explanatory. But the rest of it, kind of talk to them, let them know what we're going to have across the fence, because it matters when they spray. We don't want any drift on us, because whatever they're spraying could kill our female or our male if it's not traded. I mean, there's just such a wide playbook here of things you got to think about. And as I speak of them, it's only because some of that's probably been done wrong, or we've had an accident, or the neighbors have had a overspray on us. So, I mean, those are all just kind of words of experience, more so than anything.
Experience is a wonderful teacher.
Isn't it? Yeah.
So now we move out of that stage. We're getting ready. We're getting really close to planting time. In terms of field prep, is there anything that you deal with that's different when you're going into a seed corn production system versus what you do with commercial grain?
A little bit. A lot of times with commercial grain, we'll go out and we might do our field work early, and then it rains, and we wait and we plant. Sometimes we work and we plant. That it just kind of is a circumstance of we just get it in, like all the other farmers around it. With seed corn, I look at an extended forecast. Because it is an inbred seed, we typically like to have that ground worked real close to when we plant. But we don't want to work something with rain coming that it beats it down, and then we have a crust, and then inbred just struggles to come out of the ground. So there is quite a little bit of management involved, even with tillage, just to make sure you're the best decisions you can make at the time. And I also just like to have everything worked as good as we can, because those are fields where you're going to make multiple trips all year long with the tasseling machines, whether it be a cutter or a puller. So we like that ground to be smooth and not a rough terrain if we can help it, because our machines, inevitably, that's the kind of cut or pull that we're dealing with. So we don't like to have a lot of bounce or anything in our machines. And so we try to make a diligent decision when we go out.
So if there's a rut there, you're going to know it all summer.
Oh, yeah, and you can't see it when they're corn. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, kind of the surprise of the unknown.
So let's progress into, the actual process of planting, more the mechanics of it, right? You've kind of talked about, we got male plants, we got female inbreds, we got male inbreds. There's timing. There's just a lot that happens, or that has to happen, to make seed corn work. And step me through that. What does it take to plant seed corn and get it successfully?
We get a list that comes from, so the list of what we're producing comes from Harry, and then it moves on down the line to Kelly Muir. She helps me with what we call our splits, more or less what's the timing, what is this female and when do we bring in a male, a second male, or is it 2 plantings, is it 3 plantings? We kind of build that sheet, and that's kind of what we go off of. So typically we go out with a female and a first male. That's very common. Some of them are set up where you go out with just one of the males and come back with the female and the second male, but there can be 3 plantings involved, which starts to really complicate what you do and timing, because it's easy to talk about it now, but when you're in the throes of the season, you can go out and put your first planting in, it might rain for 10 days. And now how do you get that male in? Because corn doesn't quit growing. And we come back in at multiple stages, whether it's at emergence or 3/4 inch sprout or 2 leaf. I mean, there's just a wide variety of things that we do and targets we try to hit. And if you're rained out and it's warm and crops growing, if there's not the second male date out there or the female with the first date, 0 + 0 is 0. I mean, you don't produce a lot. So I've seen some pretty crazy circumstances and things that we've done to get a crop in the mud with seed corn. I mean, it would make your eyebrow raise, but you manage to figure it out and you get it done, and very rarely do we have like a 0 crop. We've definitely have some that have, we've been off a little bit in our nick, but in the end you end up with something.
But again, that's really largely more so than commercial grain. It's a function of timing, right?
Oh, it's very
Everybody
much
hates to be delayed.
Yeah.
But as you said, you have part of this crop already out, and it is dependent on the other part getting in a timely fashion, and that can create some real challenges. So talk about a little bit about, again, we've got male inbreds, we've got female inbreds. Talk about the configuration, because I know there are some different approaches to how they go to plant, right? So you've got female rows and then male rows. Are we on a consistent standard pattern, or as you alluded to, there are other avenues you take depending on what the hybrid is?
Well, for us, and I don't know about a lot of the other companies, but I think predominantly in seed corn production and throughout the Midwest, it's probably in 30-inch rows. We are uniquely, we've been in narrow rows for quite a few years, and we've had lots of different narrow rows. I've been anywhere from 22.5-inch to 12-inch to twin 20s to 20-inch now is kind of where we settled. And a lot of that's just because of the convenience of getting down the row. The narrower the row, in a conventional crop, you're only out there a few times a year, and you can get right down it. When it comes to detasseling, and we're out there multiple trips with machines, so having the ability to get through it and drive has landed us back on 20-inch. But to answer your question, we're in a 4-in-1 pattern. So we start on one end of the planter and that planter has to repeat itself every time you turn around. So we worked a long time trying to figure out how do you keep things symmetric on a planter. We've done odd rows on one end, and it repeats itself with half-rate plates on the way back, to having to plant in a perfect serpentine pattern the way you planted it the first time, because of that's how the planter laid out. Now we finally settled on something that's symmetric. So we plant, once we get our headlands put in, then the rest of the field is just kind of straightforward. But we do have to follow ourselves, because your males have to line up, because we have a first male, and we kind of work ourselves left to right across the planter. So we start out with 2 female on one end, and then we start our 4-in-1 pattern across that planter. But so if you're doing a second male, that second male shut off on one planter, or we don't even have seed going to that row. Okay. So we'll have our female rows and our first male rows down on the ground and planting. And then when we come back and make our second or our third trips, we have another planter we pull that's just got male row units only on it. So we'll have a 60-foot bar with just eight or 4 rows on it, so people can drive by when you're doing this and wonder what in the world you're doing. But
it gets the neighbors talking.
It does get them talking. So anyway, so that's kind of our configuration. When we start with just 2 rows of female on the end, that's, when you turn the planter around, that creates a 4, so there's a lot of thought that goes into it and how we plant. And uniquely to us, almost all seed companies leave their headlands barren, or they just plant male on them and turn on it.
Okay.
Harry wants to utilize all that ground. That doesn't produce anything if we're not planting it, and he's correct. So we plant headlands around and border every field, but with inbreds and seed corn, you can't have one row cross another because it's contamination. You may have you can't just drag into your headland. So we build exterior and interior perimeters with our GPS. So once we build our interior and we make that as we're planting, save that. And then once that's saved, then we take back off again. And that's now we're inside of a perimeter and it won't plant outside of that. In the days before GPS, when I first started here, that was all getting out and shutting rows off manually.
Sure.
I mean, technology has made this a lot different game for us, and it has made it very easy and very precise. So as we do that, we create and we leave a 2.5-foot barrier all the way around the headlands and what we call our straight rows. And then as the summer goes, and that's where our detasselers are at, that's an alleyway for them to walk. And we also don't have, any overlap from females and males or anything crossing one another. So there is a lot of strategizing. A typical farmer pulls in, plants a field, and just kind of goes around a couple times and just starts planting. I mean, we kind of have a matrix laid out of, if we plant it this way, that's the way the male row planter has to go. That's the way the sprayer has to go. That's the way the detasseling machines have to go. And that's the way we pick in the end. Everything follows everything. So anybody involved in this process has to follow, a pretty strict path when you pull into a field. And everybody has to sit down and know what the next guy's doing. It may not be you. So,
but if you do it wrong the first time, you're going to have a hard time getting good from it.
Or I'm going to have a lot to explain in the office because right. Something is not right, period. So, and it's a very expensive game,
Yeah.
People talk about seed corn, what they pay for a bag of seed corn, but there's a lot that goes into that bag. I used to be a farmer on the other side and hear and say the same complaints. Mm-hmm. And now I come here and I'm a part of the process. Well, that changes my perspective on it anyway, of just how much goes in to make this bag of corn, and that's why it costs what it does. Or some of the reason why.
Yep, exactly. And so now you've got your pattern, you're planting your 4 and 2, and as you said, it could be you're planting, the females and one male row at the same time. Could be 2 males at the same time.
Very rarely is it 2 males. We might do all the female and no male, which is to me the biggest gamble out there, because if it does rain and there's no male out there and you're rained out, nothing's gonna pollinate that female. So we can do a female and then come back and do a first male, and then come back and do a second male, and those are our 3 plants. And, so in years past, in our big years, if we have 35 to 4,200 acres of seed corn were some of our big years around here, and you plant everything 2 times for sure, sometimes 3, so you figure 2.5 times. Well, that 4,000, call it a 4,000 acre project, just turned into 10, something over 10,000 that happens in a 10-day window. So it's a challenging game, and it can be stressful.
Oh man, yeah, I can imagine. And like you said, it's all about timing, and it's about making sure you got the right stuff in the right place. So okay, you get the crop planted, and we're up and growing. Take us through kind of early part of the growing season, and then inevitably we get to the point where we're going into what we probably call detasseling, right?
Yep. Yeah, so once the crop's up and going, we kind of treat it like we do the other corn. We go out and we side dress. We top dress everything with urea and SO4 for our sulfur. So we treat that just the same, give that plant as much health as it can. And right behind that, of course, we're doing our post spraying with the herbicide for, and that's a conventional pass as well, just like we do in our pre-plant. Along with that, we're also putting in a fungicide and an insecticide at that point. We kind of start that process right off the bat with seed corn, and not that we don't with our commercial crop, but when it comes to the seed corn, we're diligent about our insecticide and our fungicide passes, because we come back as we're detasseling, and once the people have made their second pass through, we're right behind them with another fungicide and another insecticide. So we just almost, and if we have a big year of flights with moths or earworms or whatever's out there, we're making every 7 days we're spraying something, trying to keep the infestation of those worms down. So, or whatever's out there chewing on it, I guess. But so just the sprayer alone can make anywhere from 3 passes for sure, if not 5 to 6. And so, you start managing that from the minute that corn's up to the minute it's brown silked. I mean, there's just a lot that goes on with just a sprayer alone in seed corn, let alone the other things that start to come in and play as the crop gets up and going. So that kind of takes us through that June time frame, early July. And at that point, then we're starting to look, we need to start roguing. And roguing would mean that any off type that's growing taller that doesn't belong out there with that male and or that female. So we start we start a process of 2 and 3 times getting through that and roguing the off types out from about the 15th to the 18th of July, depending upon when we've planted. That might be a little early, but some years that's when we start. Right up until that point, of June.
Okay.
That would start at about the 15th to the 18th of June. So and then you get in around the 4th of July, our early inbreds are coming on then, So we you kind of start following your planting dates, you start following your maturity, and now you're starting to, I'm starting to now stage our corn is what I call it. Where are we at? How many days are we out from, starting to see that silk movement and the tassel push, and we start getting ready for our cutters.
You just mentioned about maturity. So one thing I guess I didn't ask you about is, there at Adel, roughly what kind of maturity range are you working with on the seed corn you're producing?
So I'll raise anything from about 90 to 92 days is the low end, up to 118.
Okay.
So I kind of catch it all right in there. I know we probably have some that's a little earlier than that, I suppose, but that's usually what I see. Just kind of that's a pretty wide variety actually, but we're kind of in a growing area where we can do both.
Well, that was my observation. I was like, so now that's another layer to this whole what seems like a multi-level puzzle that you're dealing with, Steve, right? So now in addition you have hybrids that are a wider range of maturity than most growers would typically deal with. So in addition to timing, in addition to all of this, now you've got early stuff, you got late stuff, you got, and then you got all these passes through the field. It starts to sound like, you may have equipment taking turns to get in the field.
Days it's looked like that. When weather might have put us in that situation.
Right,
so
yeah. Okay, so you've done roguing, and we're going to go into detasseling, right?
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and so at that point, we're coming out of roguing, and while they're doing all that, of course, the time of year corn's growing fast. I'm staging it. We go. I kind of keep track of it by leaf count. How many leaves does it have to push till we see tassel? And each one of those inbreds, a female, is different. Any of the new ones, I'm kind of just rolling with it.
Yep.
Any of the ones that we've raised for years, I kind of know what to expect. So I kind of know how to plan it, and you start building in a schedule of. It's not just one field, because we have a lot of them, and it may not have worked out perfect when I planted from a 90-day corn to a 108-day or 118-day corn. The weather may have put us in a position where it's already in 10 days. Yeah. And so now I can't do it all in 10 days. And so we kind of start staging and planning the best we can with that leaf stage to go from whether it's 3-4 leaves to starting to push the tassel out. And then where's the silk? So typically when the silk is at the end of the ear inside the shoot that's coming out of the leaf collar, that is typically when it's time to put the cutter in. And at that point, we establish a cut height, and we like to cut on the average halfway through the tassel of the field. There's talls, there's shorts, but we try to find the average by measuring from the ground up. What is that height? Whether that is 42 inches or 56 inches, every hybrid or every female inbred is different. Okay. So I establish that height, and then I have my cutters, and we come in and the industry, a lot of them use cutters that have tactical eyes, and so it'll follow the height of the corn through the field, up and down, up and down. Now, Harry has never really cared for that, and honestly, neither do I. So we establish a height. Like I said, whatever height that is for this corn. Let's just say it's 48 inches. Well, we'll cut it right there. And if it's a fairly good growing season and a fairly even inbred, we may just cut it. Typically, we cut everything twice. Okay. So we'll cut it once, and then we let it extend. And the more you let it extend, the more yield. You're not taking as many leaves off of that corn and hampering your yield. So we let it extend, usually 1 or 2 days in between cuts, and then we leave it, weather pending, because rain can foul all this plan up. Yeah. And if it's after we've cut it the second time, we like to let it set for 2 days if we can, if not 3, and let it extend out. All the tassel to extend out, so our machine pullers, when they come through, they have the tassel to grab and not all the leaves. So we like to see that tassel grow up out of the leaves 3 or 4 inches, maybe 5, and as those rubber wheels come through on the pullers, then it just, at that point, we're hoping to get all but 10%, and that's not always the case, for our people to come through and clean up from all the uneven stuff or whatever the machine misses. But we like for the people just to do 10%, but most of the time it's in the, probably in that 20 to 25% range. A lot of the inbreds I see are just new to the system. We don't know how they're going to react. I don't know how they're going to extend and grow.
Right.
And so with that brings a few challenges, but we've got a good group of people, which is a whole different subject, which we can get into on who we use and how we get them here, because that we have a fantastic group, but that's just a different layer to that even yet that takes a lot of work to get these people here, and we take care of them and we house them all here.
Yeah, and so then that's the last stage, is doing that final cleanup.
That hand
and making
cleanup.
sure you get that, everything's clean when you get done with that process. So obviously detasseling, is happening during this. Well, the goal is to get pollination, right?
Right.
The goal is to get the pollen from those, what we call male inbreds over onto these female inbreds.
That's correct.
I know we talk about in our system, we like these products. Some of these products have really good pollination windows. I mean, talk me through that process of from the point when you get to the end where you say, okay, we've got the pollination we're going to get. Like what's that?
So as we're cutting and we're going through this whole stage, of course, we're taking notes on this. We're looking for that, female silk to come on. Did our first male get put in the right time? Is it now got tassel out? Is it shedding? And if so, what's the percent of silk that's out? What's the percent of, the first male shedding? Where's your second male? When's it coming on? So usually, you can have a pretty good idea if you're getting good pollinating days and good pollinating inbreds. You know right away when something's off. Yeah, and weather might have caused that. We might have caused that with a weather forecast. We try to push it, it looks like we could get a heavy rain. So we'll go out and try to sneak a male in, and, whether we put our planter in a notch deeper or a notch shallower, or whichever way we think we need to go, just so we get something out there. A lot of times that works. Sometimes that doesn't work as well as you wanted it to. So as we're cutting and our machines are cutting, our machines are pulling, and our people are coming in and they're following. And so now on day one, you've done field one and you've cut it twice and you've waited, and now you've pulled it with the machine, and now you've got the people in there, and then you wait a day or 2 days, and then you bring the people back through again. But in the meantime, you've got field 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 doing the same thing. So and you're trying to take notes on all this. Usually July 6th, 7th, and 8th through July 25th is you don't remember much because it all happens very fast, and there's just a lot going on in there. And like I said, we're trying to spray things over the top behind that once the people are out for the last time, because we don't want the people to be affected by any herbicides or anything. So then there's that level I'm trying to keep track of. And then just as soon as you get through all of this pollination, especially in dry years, when is that male done? When is that first and second male, especially the second male, when are we done pollinating? Because we want to cut it out. So then we bring another machine in and start cutting our male out. Number one, we don't want it in there. We don't want it taking any nutrients or moisture out of the soil that the female could be taking. And we like to get it cut and laying on the ground and dead and shriveled up before we ever come through and pick. If there's ever one that you missed or it's laying out there, you don't want a good ear of that coming through with your female ears that you've just produced. So, and by that time, we're going to start talking about seed corn harvesters, because whatever the last field is, the first one's ready to pick.
So in any of this work, Steve, do you work with like female sterile inbreds?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yeah. So we do work with female sterile, and from a production standpoint, we love the female sterile. You plant it, and it doesn't need detasseled, and it's pollinated, and it just makes your regular hybrid seed corn, but it is sterile. So we have to produce fertile in the same field, and then we blend it when we're shelling and when we're bagging. And so the reason for a lot of that is, from a production standpoint, obviously it's a lot less cost and it yields more because you're not cutting it and you're not, taking yield out of it with machines and people. And also it yields more in the field because not every plant out there is fertile, and, pollen takes a lot of that plant's energy to produce grain. Right. So if you just have, we blend everything in a third, 2/3 ratio. Some are right in there. So we'll have 2/3 of our female in some of these fields that will be sterile and a third of it fertile. And then when we pick, like I said, we bring it in and we separately, but when it's dried, we shell it and we blend it right then, and it makes the ratio. And when the farmer plants a hybrid field the next year, he doesn't have some of those plants aren't out there trying to produce all that extra pollen that it doesn't need. So the fertile ones we mix in is doing all
Mixed
the
in,
pollinating.
doing the pollinating.
And the sterile ones are just out there, getting pollinated by the fertile ones, but the odds are your yield potential goes up.
But from a seed production standpoint, other than the fact you've got to raise this other batch of that same material, but otherwise it does simplify your process considerably.
Yeah, it's a little more to keep track of, like if you're the person planting, because now you have one male, two of the same female, but one sterile, one's fertile. You don't want to get those backwards and not know what you did, because you're going to have a mess in the summer. So from that standpoint, it's always just something to keep track of. But from a production standpoint, it's a lot easier.
Now, you talked throughout this process, there's, like you said, a lot of trips that go through the field, from the cutting of tassels to spraying and all of this. So talk a little about the machines that you use there.
Yeah, so, kind of back up a little bit. So our planters, we were talking about our configuration. Our planters are 60 feet.
Okay.
So they're a 60-foot planter with 36 rows on them in a 4-in-1 pattern. So we have 8 males on there. So the rest of the planter's female. When I first started here, we had a little bit different row setup and configuration. The planters were 60, but our cutters were 30. And that was kind of back in the day where, technology hadn't really advanced to where it's at with machines and everything. So these were open station machines, and we cut in the day and we cut in the night, and we didn't have a lot of help back in those days.
Gotcha.
So that was not as fun as it is now. Sitting on an open station machine with a 4-cylinder and a glass pack behind you, But, as we got into the days when we had our narrow rows, the 12-inch specifically, it kind of changed that. Whatever we did, we had to follow that planter, because we had to have a place to drive. So we had tram rows back then we drove in. So, as Harry and I talked back when we built those first 12-inch planters, how do we pull in detasseling machines? That becomes the next challenge. We can spray, we can do a lot of things, but how do we do this? And so I went to Haggie and started working with them. Can we do 60 feet? We'd went from, at that point, we'd gone from 30-foot cutters to 40 and even 45-foot cutters, because we had 90-foot planters in there for a while.
Okay.
So we kind of landed, when we got to the narrow rows, we landed back at 60 feet, and Haggie said, yeah, I think we can do this. And they had a 60-foot nitrogen bar that they used in tall crop to side dress.
Okay.
So we started taking those bars and converting them and turning them into the only 4 that I know of that exist in 60 feet on 20-inch. And there are 5, it's got 5 individual flex points of the frame. And if it's dry, because it's got a lot of wheels on the ground that carry it, there's probably nothing better than I've ever seen to cut corn. So those are unique to us. So we have 2 60-foot cutters, and we have 2 60-foot pullers. So when the weather cooperates, there's probably nothing more efficient than that. And what we do, we can get across a lot of ground efficiently, effectively, and do a really good job. If it starts to rain and we have issues trying to drive and push all this extra stuff on the ground with wheels on the ground that are collecting mud and leaves that we've just cut, then we have different challenges. But so that is just another whole dynamic there. The first couple of years when we went to Haggie, I make it sound easy, but it took a lot of oil. We're running 3 times the cutter motors than anybody else was, putting it on a machine that was never designed to run it. So as we built those first machines, they were building things uniquely for us with bigger cooling packages on them for the oil, for the engine, higher horsepower, different torque hubs. We ran the gamut of learning, and Alan Haggie and that group up there was fantastic. And as we went through 2 or 3 years of that and went from 12-inch to the twin 20s to the 20-inch now, of course, Deere came in and bought Haggie out during those years. But during that time frame, boy, I'll tell you what, they stood by me, and we figured that out. And to this day, we're still running those bars with almost without fail.
Oh, wow.
And when we started that, we just didn't even know what we were doing, other than we needed to do it because the crop was going in and it had to be dealt with, So you just get some of those challenges thrown at you and you figure it out. So the first year we ever did it, we had 2 bars, and then the next year we went into 4, so we had 2 and 2.
Okay, so now I guess we're late into the summer. We turn our attention to harvest, which is another thing that involves a fair bit of machinery. So I wanted to talk a bit about your process for harvesting of seed corn.
Like yourself, you've seen in the tour groups that come in, our seed corn harvesters are very unique to us. They're built by us, and we're the only ones that run them, period. And they're old combines that we've converted into seed corn harvesters with the husking beds on board. Your typical, so the other seed companies use Oxbows, Byrons, and when they harvest, they're taking their corn with the husk on. They catch on the go, much like we do, but they put it into their big carts, take it over, dump it on semis, haul it for who knows the distance to a plant where the same variety is coming in from 10 other growers, dumped into a pile and run through their system of husking and drying and the pass system. So that corn is handled, it's fatigued almost as many times as it's been handled. So Harry's belief always is the less you handle this corn, the better. The germ will be better. The grain will be better. So years ago, and it was even before I started, a few years before I started, they came up with the idea to Harry and Fred and Terry Snyder to put husking beds on a combine that they converted and take all the harvesting components out of that combine, put A and K husking beds like the other companies use these same husking beds in their facilities. The difference is that ours is on the machine.
Right.
So, that first phase years ago was on a 7700 combine, and that had one A and K husking bed on it, and it had what we call the Ferris wheel. It had a big wheel behind the cab, and as the corn came in from the corn head and up through the feeder house, it dumped onto this big oscillating wheel that grabbed that corn in buckets and carried it up to the top and dumped it onto a belt where the sorting happened. And it was husked and then went out to our boxes, obviously, that are unique to us as well on running gears, and we bring it back to our seed corn dryers. So after the first year, the 7700, that machine worked, but it wasn't obviously what everybody thought it needed to be.
Yeah.
And so that quickly progressed into a pair of 8820s. And we went at that point to 2 husking beds per machine to increase the volume and, being able to pick up more production out of 2 machines. And as that crop comes in, that machine, it comes into a set of cross belts and comes through a pair of shakers like you'd see in a plant for husking beds, goes to the 2 husking beds, and all the corn is husked, whether it's the very first machine or the ones I'm running now. That corn is husked in the field before it ever makes it up to the top where the people are riding and sort. We sort our off types or anything that wasn't husked. If it wasn't husked, it comes back through a return. If it's an off type, it gets pitched off. When that corn leaves our seed corn harvesters, then it goes up into our big seed boxes that we pull on our running gears that hold, 2 to 225 bushels of ear corn, or 125, of ear corn, and it's taken back and put on our low heat drying plenums back at our shop, and we stack one on top of the other and have the ability to dry. I don't know how many varieties at a time, I guess, but there's quite a bit. We have a number of buildings, and each one of those buildings holds 48 boxes once they're stacked on top of one another. So that's kind of the quick rundown of that. But, the machines, without a doubt, David, are very unique, and we could dive into those as deep as you want to go. It involves a lot of labor because people ride on those machines. There's people that ride down below to kind of help the volume move through. We can typically have plugs. So we have our guys that ride down below. Most of the time, 2 to 4 down below, depending upon variety. And is it a year where the crop is green and it's a stay green year, or we've had a dry August and it picks good and, things flow through better.
Yeah.
But usually an operator for the machine and 10 to 12 people riding. So on 4 machines, call it 48 people is usually the number. Each one of those machines has a catch tractor. So you got 4 guys that are catching, and we have 6 guys that haul back into the plant. And once we start hauling in and start drying, that's a 24-hour process. We don't necessarily pick 24 hours anymore because just staffing. Yeah. And our machines have gotten more efficient and a lot better over the years as we've moved into these new and updated machines that we have. But it takes 12 people a day, maybe 10 people at night to run our dryers. And then as we're drying, we usually don't have the room for everything. We're harvesting in the dryer, so we have to flip that dryer all those spaces 2 to 3 times for the season for it all to work. So now we start shelling. And as we're shelling, now we have to start hauling. So that's day and night because the sheller doesn't shut off. So, it can take 90 to 100, maybe even a few more people to make seed corn harvest happen. So those same people that are with us for detasseling are also with us for harvest. They're with me for seed corn harvest, and some of them are split up and we use them in the dryers, and the rest of them are over in the nursery or in our ISOs hand picking. So at any one given time, there's just there's a lot of people and a lot of movement to make seed corn happen.
Well, at least you aren't doing commercial grain at the same time.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
oh wait.
Yeah.
No, wait, you are.
Because usually we've started corn and soybeans are happening. So, you about got to keep your head on a swivel all days around there because there's a lot happening and nobody's caught standing around, especially right in those 4 to 6 week period there of seed corn harvest.
So, I mean, you've been doing this a long time, Steve, and you've seen a lot and seen the progression. Are there specific things that stand out to you from your time working, particularly with seed corn, and things that have changed how you guys approach that have really made a difference in that operation?
That's pretty easy, and that's probably more than just one topic. There are things that stand out for me. I suppose a big one for sure for me would be going to narrow rows. I mean, we'd been, I don't know how many years it had been for me, over 10, went from 22.5-inch rows when I started. That's what it was when I started here, which seemed narrow from coming from the farm I came from of 30-inch rows. 22.5 was just like, what, this is narrow. What are we doing? And then Harry saying we're going to go to ultra narrow rows and we're going to grow seed corn the same way. So what stands out to me is how we changed every piece of equipment on the farm, including what we use for seed production, to make 12-inch work. That was the planters, which were new to us, and the technology that went with it. And that spring in our shop, that's a decision of what we were going to do to in January and between Christmas and New Year's of that year of 2012 going into 2013, we made 3 planters, we made 2 detasseling machines, we made 3 corn heads. So to me, when you ask something that stands out to me, that stands out.
Yeah.
I mean, we manufactured our own equipment in one winter and summer and managed to put all the crop in somehow, and it all worked good. And it led us to where we're at now with how we raise corn and what we sell to the industry. And now the other seed companies are, adopting and testing and growing corn and yield trials just the same as we are with, narrow rows and, high population and high density. So when you look at it that way, maybe someday you look back and think that's what just changed the whole industry, and maybe you were part of it. It didn't seem like it at the time. It seemed like an awful lot. But, that's a big one that stands out to me. And that was the whole farm, but a lot of that was complicated with the seed corn production. And then as we changed from into that same era, we were already maximizing our 8820s that we use for seed corn and knew we needed to move to the next level of machine to handle more volume and a growing seed corn production project. So we started transforming into a 9610, which year after year that led to 98, three 9860s, because that's what we've got now out of those 4 machines. And we kind of went from, we were just figuring things out to we went to a real machine with a lot of horsepower and a lot of hydraulics and a lot of gallons per minute, and just completely changed all of that. And it wasn't just one person, that was just everybody. It's everybody's ideas, a lot of people working together. And at the same time, we're building all the other equipment, and it just kind of forged a bond between all of us that were in the shop and how you think, and a new respect that you had for the guys that worked around you, because it wasn't like we went out and hired a millwright to do this. We just looked at everybody in the shop, said, grab something, we're going to get started. So it kind of made us what we are, know. And to this day, that's a lot of us that still work together. And I don't know, I was just kind of looking at it, I feel like we've been to war and back. It kind of builds a group that's hard, that bond is hard to break.
Well, like you said, now all of a sudden there's a lot of talk about, corn moving toward that, narrow row high pop. And I've often told people, if we want to create the hybrids that growers are going to want in the future, we got to start making them today.
Right.
To have them ready 10 years from now. And for us to do that, your team has to do all of these things
right.
to make the system work. And so it's a Herculean effort. And like I said, the things that your team does are absolutely amazing. So kind of as we close out our conversation, Steve, I guess, we've talked about a whole range of things here, but even for, the growers that who are familiar with, again, how seed corn generally is produced, what would you want them to know about the way Stine does it?
Obviously, how we harvest it, that's a big deal. To me, that stands out as, if you're putting that much care into the seed so it germs better and the user has a better product, that just ought to tell you how we do everything leading up to that. So we've gone to a lot of work to make that system work, and for very good reason. But even if they could just see behind the scenes how passionate Harry is about seed corn and trying to produce the best, highest yielding corn for the farmer so he can make the most money, that is what he's really trying to do. And I think that makes us different than other seed corn companies that are just trying to race out and beat the next guy to the line. I think it starts right there. And when he thinks like that, then we all do. So there's just a lot of care and integrity that goes into what we produce.
Yeah, and when you have a farmer at the helm, you've got that point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, the other companies, I don't want to run them down because I really don't know how they run, but they're big and they're corporate. And maybe people look at us that way too because we're kind of big in the community, but really we're not. You know, we're just kind of a farm out in the middle of where you and I grew up, and it's people that are operating, doing all these things. We're all farmers when we came.
Yep.
And so I think that's what makes us unique. And I think there's just a lot of care that goes into it from the inception to what's in a bag.
Well, Steve, that's awesome. Again, I appreciate you coming on today to talk about seed corn production. I get to see you guys in the summer when we have groups come out, and there's just always a million things going on, and I don't know how you keep it all together, but it's truly impressive. So I appreciate you coming on and talk about seed corn production, and thanks to you and to your team for everything that you do for Stine and for our growers.
Well, thanks for having me, and that's over 20 years worth of stuff we just went through in an hour, so it probably seems like a lot firing out of me.
Thank you for listening to the Stine Seedcast. To never miss an episode, subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice. Have a question for our experts? Email asktheseedcast@stineseed.com to have your questions answered on a future episode. To learn more about Stine Seed Company, visit stineseed.com. And remember, Stine has yield.